What is up, wrestling fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Paul Heyman SmackDown podcast here from Smark Out Moment. Joining me, Callum Wiggins, in this journey back in time to the year 2002, once again, is Robert DeFelice.
How we doing, Callum? We are 72 hours away from Unforgiven. Are you excited for Unforgiven?
I was, until this show happened.
That's fair.
That's probably, I think, not to bury the lead and hopefully not to put you off from listening to this edition, but this is probably one of, if not the weakest episode of SmackDown we've watched so far on the journey. It's
Yeah,
pretty,
this isn't very noteworthy at all.
yeah, after coming off of the show where Billy and Chuck got married, or didn't get married as it were, but got attacked and Raw invaded, and Hardcore Holly broke his neck, and all this other stuff that happened that was very notable, we're just left with a pretty substandard episode.
I
But
will tell you, go back and listen. That discussion last week was great.
yep, but hopefully we'll get a lot of fun discussion out of this one anyway, and I invite everyone to drop your comments below if you're watching on YouTube. Just join in the conversation. Let us know what you thought about this episode of SmackDown, what you thought about what we're talking about this episode of SmackDown. If you're not listening through YouTube, you're listening on one of the other podcast platforms, then leave us a rating, leave us a review. That all goes to help us out. If you're on YouTube and you're starting the journey here for some reason, here at episode 13, and you want to go back and start from the very beginning, there's a playlist on the YouTube channel, so you can head back there, go from the beginning and up till now. A good way to just while away some monotonous work, just go through all the podcasts. And if you haven't watched this episode of SmackDown in preparation for this, there is a link in the description to the WWE Network to this very episode of SmackDown. So the episode of SmackDown we are covering, of course, is the September 19th, 2002 edition from the World Arena in Colorado Springs, Colorado. But before we do that, I usually go for a bit of news and events that take place, but I think last week we kind of overdid it in terms of the Billy and Chuck thing, and there wasn't really anything of real note in the observers and any other sources that I was checking. So I thought, yeah, let's just give that one a rest for 1 week. Unlucky number 13. It's an unlucky news week because there's nothing there to talk about. But instead, we will talk about what Raw was up to. So in terms of doing that, let's start with the ratings. So Raw's rating for the 16th of September, or September 16th edition, is a 3.4, whereas SmackDown's for the September 19th, so I suggested, a 4.02. So SmackDown,
All right, that's handy beating.
Yeah, SmackDown once again, not as hefty as last week's one. Obviously, last week's one was the highest rated SmackDown that we're going to cover throughout this entire journey. But it was it's still a resounding victory for SmackDown, as what will be the case for the next several weeks and months. But it just goes to show what the gap is at this point in time. That SmackDown is handily, comfortably beating Raw on pretty much all fronts at this point.
I think that Raw at this time was really in the process of finding itself, and it was not presenting very A-show quality.
Well, what was Raw representing? Well, this is what we cover a little bit, just in a little bit of a look at what Raw was doing. So Raw had two championship matches on the show. So Triple H was defending the World Heavyweight Championship against Jeff Hardy. And how do you think Triple H won that match?
I would say low blow pedigree.
No, he won with a sleeper hold.
Not the submission. A submission crossed my mind, and it was the Indian Deathlock. And
yeah, he made Jeff Hardy pass out to the sleeper hold.
I have to watch that at some point because that's so bizarre. Triple H was really trying to find himself at this point, which is very strange to me.
So Triple H was able to keep hold of the World Heavyweight Championship, but one champion that wasn't able to keep hold of their championship was Rob Van Dam, who was defeated thanks to Triple H's interference for the Intercontinental Championship by Chris Jericho. So Chris Jericho is the new Intercontinental Champion and would head into Unforgiven holding that title.
Well, ups the ante for his match with Ric Flair, and I like it. I think Jericho is one of, if not the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time.
Speaking of Ric Flair, he had a match against Rico on Rico's first night on officially part of the Raw roster after last week's invasion following the wedding ceremony, and he took on so Rico versus Ric Flair, and in an upset result, Rico defeated Ric Flair,
Shut up. No, no, that didn't happen.
Yes, it did happen.
That's
And it happened
awful.
in a very, very, well, a very awkward looking way, which is that Rico hit one of his roundhouse spin kicks to essentially the back of the head of Flair because Flair decided he wasn't going to sell it properly. So Flair got hit by it. Flair then grabbed the ropes, even though he wasn't meant to as part of the actual structure of the match. But the referee just kept counting, counted the three.
Respect. You know what? Respect. I don't care. Like, Flair, I know Flair's having confidence issues at this point, but really a loss to Rico?
Yep, so that was a way of trying to get Rico over immediately because of the new move over. Flair was, as we talk about, just as we will also discuss on Unforgiven when we do the Patreon review for that, he was on a bit of a downward spiral, and they were doing a going to be a big transition for him coming along the line. So they didn't really see a big issue of him losing to Rico on this show.
I think in hindsight, maybe the beginnings of like, hey, don't worry, this thing is totally gonna suck, but we have plans for you, so nobody's gonna remember this.
The final big thing that happened on Raw was a carryover from the wedding angle, which and also from the previous episodes of Raw where we had the HLA segment. It was a segment involving the International Organization of Women, the IOWs, who were
Yeah.
parading and picketing outside of the Raw Stadium in order to basically say that women were being exploited on the show. So Eric Bischoff invited them all in, basically called them a bunch of uptight lesbians, and said that,
Jesus Christ.
and he was going to say that he's had to have 3 words for them. When one of the women stepped up and kicked him square in the balls, that woman, of course, was Stephanie McMahon in disguise.
Okay.
Billy and Chuck entered the fray. They hit the code red, well, essentially their version of the
Doomsday?
the Doomsday device onto Eric Bischoff. They ran through the crowd in the same way that Eric and 3 Minute Warning did on the previous edition. And yeah, that's basically part of your build up to their match at Unforgiven, which is after that attack, Bischoff made the challenge to SmackDown, saying that it's going to be Billy and Chuck versus Rose and Jamal, 3 Minute Warning. If Bischoff was to lose, if Raw's team lost the match, then Eric Bischoff would have to kiss Stephanie McMahon's ass. And if SmackDown lost, then Stephanie would have to perform HLA.
That Eric Bischoff is quite the negotiator, I guess.
Yeah,
All right.
controversy creates cash. That's probably like the big takeaway from that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably the best that Raw was offering. So I guess even with this lackluster episode of SmackDown, I kind of would have preferred to watch this than seemingly the Raw episode.
Yeah, I think this era of Raw relies far too heavily on nonsense, and it's really not good.
So let's talk about SmackDown. Cleanse the palate a little bit. So September 19th, 2002, the show kicks off with a recap of the Billy and Chuck wedding. So just a little video package and how it all just fell apart, as you would expect with any WWE wedding. So one of the big things that I think we need to talk about for this one is, did you notice who was doing the announcing on this show?
I did not.
It was not Tony Jimmel, because
Oh
he
my
was
god!
away
You
on
know
vacation.
what? It was Justin Roberts. I didn't know he was at the company that long.
No, he wasn't actually officially signed with the company at this point. Or at least I don't think that he was on a very major capacity. He was doing announcing duties for a lot of the smaller indie shows in and around that area. And they brought him on and they thought that he did a good job on here, that he was brought in a backstage capacity at this point in
Wow.
time. So yeah, so this is the first show, at least I'm aware of, that Justin Roberts does announcing for. I don't think he does it. He picks it up again until round about definitely for a few years after this.
Yeah, because
I
I
think
remember him picking up for ECW.
yeah, his first announcing job is with ECW. So and that
That's
doesn't
pretty
come and gone for
cool. Like
another
that's something you wouldn't see today.
yeah, and doesn't come along for another 4 or so years. But it was nice to have a little understudy for Tony Chimmel if ever he needed to go away or had time off. So I think this is the one and only time that Justin Roberts does it throughout the entire run. The rest of the time it is fulfilled by Tony Chimmel. But
I'm
it's a nice
gonna
little Easter egg
keep an
for him.
eye on that though. That's because that's really unique. I didn't even catch that until you brought it up.
So we immediately go into the first match, which is Jamie Noble and Nidia versus Rey Mysterio and Torrie Wilson in a mixed tag team match.
A mixed tag team match, hold the cucumber or what? Like,
Well,
this was quite the match, Callum.
you'd say hold the cucumber. It's more like hold the tomato because
I
that's
that's
basically
the way I
everything
ended
that
up
Taz was
happening.
referring to Torrie Wilson.
No, amazing stuff.
It is absolutely horrendous to listen to 2002 commentary through a 2020 perspective about essentially every single thing they talk about the women is about how absolutely gorgeous Torrie Wilson is and how much of a tramp Nidia is.
Yeah, everything. This is a common theme for us that we talk about, but everything feels so skeevy. Like it just feels like your skin crawls a little bit. Like even Noble, which was funny, but the way he wanted to take a Bronco Buster from Torrie so bad was like, wow, this is a bit much to be exposing kids to, because kids were watching this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like it's not like nowadays when it's only like 50-year-olds or so that are watching Raw and SmackDown and NXT. I actually have children watching at this point in time. But
Yeah.
in terms of the actual action, the main action was between Mysterio and Noble. So this is the first time we've seen Rey Mysterio interact with the Cruiserweight Champion since coming on SmackDown.
I
I think it was odd that he hasn't been more involved in that scene so far.
Yeah, I do, but I also think that because of who's writing, because it's Paul Heyman, they know that Mysterio's got more to offer than to just be running around with the Cruiserweight title, because the Cruiserweight title, as good as it is, Mysterio clearly has star power beyond that.
So in terms of the actual in-ring action, most of it, as I mentioned, is done between Noble and Rey, and that stuff's pretty good. Nidia pulls Mysterio off a pin at one point. Mysterio then decides to chase her around ringside, allowing Noble to clothesline him. Noble tries to do the Tiger powerbomb to Torrie, but is drop kicked away by Mysterio. Mysterio teases doing the Bronco Buster to Nidia, but Torrie does it instead. And then, as you mentioned, Noble sits in the corner, waits for Torrie to give him a Bronco Buster. She essentially teases him a little bit until Rey leaps over her and then does one of his own. So that was a
This is not the
funny
only
spot.
time we'll see that spot on SmackDown.
No, absolutely. 619, Nidia temporarily stops Mysterio from springing into the ring, but Torrie takes her out. Noble ducks the West Coast pop, but then is hit by a Code Red and, well, an actual Code Red, which is the Yoshi Tonic or whatever you want to call it, essentially, the flipping sunset flip. And Mysterio gets the victory, so Mysterio pins the Cruiserweight Champion.
He would not be in that division, as I think we'll talk about soon. He's got other plans for SmackDown, but it was good to know that like Rey is getting there and he's getting to the point of where he's going to be the cruiserweight standout.
Yeah, it was just a nice little sprint of a match. The cruiserweights did what they needed to do. The women did what they typically do,
Could
and
do.
yeah, and then yeah, it's just nothing really super outside of the horribleness between 2002 and 2020. There was nothing really offensive about this in general.
Yeah, I did like the Rey leaping over Torrie to give Noble the Bronco Buster. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was fun. So we move on to Stephanie and Reverend Devon arguing backstage, with Stephanie basically saying that she needs Devon's help to secure Batista to a SmackDown contract. So, which gives me the impression that Batista was only contracted to Devon in the same way that, in terms of AEW presenting at the moment, they present that Wardlow is only signed to a contract by MJF, not with AEW.
Well, Devon he actually makes note of that. He actually says he's under contract to me and not you. And then as she's trying to get him to help her, she also says, "Hey, fuck you! You're gonna go fight Batista tonight." The end.
Yeah, so that conversation separates as Paul Heyman comes in and he's trying to suck up to Stephanie because that's what he does. Stephanie informs Heyman that Sarah, the Undertaker's wife, went into forced labour earlier today, and she's been released from the hospital now, and the Undertaker is trying to get to the show because he was at her bedside, presumably. So she tells Heyman to keep his security close because Heyman has arranged a personal security guards to protect Brock Lesnar from the Undertaker.
Which is weird because nowadays I wouldn't think Brock Lesnar would need personal security from anybody, but different time, different style of presentation.
Yeah, I don't think. Again, it's more about this juxtaposition of the fact that I think Lesnar really wants to prove his dominance over the Undertaker and wouldn't mind just beating the crap out of him, but Heyman wants to protect his investment as best as he possibly can.
Yeah, we're gonna start to see very quickly that Lesnar. I don't want to say he's defiant, but he's not as willing to listen to the chicken shit manager as somebody might be.
Well, speaking of, well, not a chicken shit manager, but speaking of a general manager, we have the first of a couple of long-winded promo segments involving the general managers of the show. Again, this is another example of after some pretty good wrestling-orientated show, we're back to the general manager bullshit here. So Stephanie comes out to the ring. She calls Bischoff clever for last week's attack, but he forgot that you don't screw with him, McMahon. They show a replay of the International Organization of Women segment on Raw. Stephanie talks about crushing Bischoff's testicles with that kick, and then the interpromotional challenge that Bischoff made. Stephanie says the match is on, and she's going to have a live video chat with Bischoff later in the show in order to hash out the stipulations, because that's super fun, having just two people talk over a video with each other.
I mean, very advanced. That's just 2020 and 2002.
And then she brings up Billy and Chuck, who she refers to, and I quote, the greatest tag team in WWE history.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a McMahon segment without hyperbole, am I right, Callum?
Well, I guess if you refer to WWE history, I mean, WWE hasn't existed since May
Been around
2002.
for a few months at this
So
point.
maybe they are the greatest tag team of that period.
I would accept that, yes.
So Billy cut to promo, says he's looking forward to beating Jamal and Rosie, but now how he's conflicted about how after the match he should stay teamed with Chuck or he should pursue his singles career. And then Chuck makes this really forced joke about how Billy goes both ways. Yeah, it was it's pretty dumb. And then Billy makes a going down joke on Chuck, which just this is so stupid. This is just
Hold on. We talked about this before. Why is it that they have to needle Chuck? They just have to. Billy gets the cheesy going both ways joke, and Chuck gets the you're gonna go down joke. What?
Chuck's I don't want to say the Jannetty because we know how bad Jannetty is now.
Yeah, we can't say that anymore.
But yeah, he's the weak link for the team, or the one that can be a bit more can have a bit more ribs against him than Billy does. But
yeah, I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, Billy just flexing his superiority and his longevity a little bit here to make sure that he gets the slightly better lines. Billy then goes to do the 2 words for them sign off, so he's reincarnating the time when he was actually in a very popular tag team.
Yeah.
But
isn't it weird that as soon as he got rid of the Billy and Chuck and the whole gay thing, he had to go right back to, hey, I was in DX, remember that?
But before he can do that, they're interrupted by Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle referred to this as a bad episode of Three's Company. He said last week's publicity attempt was nothing compared to him winning the gold medal in 1996. That's a real need for publicity and getting seen in the newspapers. Then Chuck starts a "You suck" chant. Kurt says that he's not gay, although he has nothing against them. They had to make sure to get that line in.
Got that in again. Good.
And that the gays love him because he's adorable. Angle challenges one of them to a match tonight, but Stephanie says that she wants them fighting as a tag team before the match at Unforgiven to make sure they're primed and ready. Angle is so confident, because obviously that's Angle's gimmick, is that he's so overconfident of his own ability, that he allows quote-unquote Will and Grace to pick his partner.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was relevant. And so they smartly pick the guy that Angle is facing at Unforgiven, Chris Benoit. And then
because we have Billy and Chuck to thank for one of the better things that'll happen on SmackDown.
And then we have kind of a rehash of last week's thing with Angle stumbling over his words and saying things that were rather inappropriate. So Angle says that that's a hard one to swallow, because, and he says he's still going to climb on Billy and Chuck later, then put their legs over their head before leaving, and then it's just
I don't know how Kurt Angle gets away with being such a dork, but also being the most legitimate badass in the game.
I think they had to make him so much of a dog just because of how like efficient and effective a wrestler he is. That he needs something to be a kink in his armor, essentially. Because eventually they would make him like this super powered wrestling machine. But right now he's got so many comedy chops and he's got such a vivid personality that they're going just using that to essentially present that he's not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination. They have to make him somewhat easy for the crowd to boo and think that they suck because he's just a joke, really, who's a really, really good wrestler.
I love it though. He does it so well. Like everything that we've said about like Taz on commentary, it's the exact opposite when Kurt Angle does this stuff. It's funny, and like you miss it when Kurt Angle does it.
Oh yeah, he was the best part of this segment, but again, this segment just went on way too long, and it's about a match that I don't really care about. This whole
You don't care about a Billy and Chuck in a tag team match against two future world champions?
Are they two future world champions? Oh! I mean, you're talking about this one. I was talking more about the.
I meant the match on SmackDown, not the match at Unforgiven. That is a weird usage of your general managers.
Yeah, but I guess they thought that would get a bit more ratings and continue the HLA angle. I guess if you even want to call it that.
I have to ask the question. We don't have to linger on it, but Vince willingly putting his daughter in certain situations. Do you think that has to do with some of the things discussed in Vince McMahon's 2001 Playboy interview?
I don't think it's to that extent. I think it's the idea that if Vince would be willing to do that stuff himself, then he expects that the members of his family and his employees will do the same thing. So if he'd be willing to do some sort of angle of this magnitude which is supposed to embarrass you, then he'd expect Stephanie and Shane to do the same thing as well.
I guess. Well said.
Yeah, I think it's just a case of, well, if I'm going to do it, then I expect everyone else to do it. That sort of.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So I don't think it's that. I definitely don't think it's to that angle. And we heard enough stuff to suggest that it might be that thing. I'm not ruling it out entirely, but I think that it's more just about, okay, people would find that interesting and I would do this sort of thing. So Stephanie can do it as well. But,
yeah. It's one of those things, though, that I would like to see just discussed at one point, just because there seems to be a lot of that, like, hey, why don't we put Stephanie in these positions? It's very strange to me.
Well, let's move on to somewhat of a collector's item, which is the first match on WWE TV between Brock Lesnar and John Cena.
Good God, John Cena wore that exact gear this past April at WrestleMania and almost looked exactly the same. I think that's funny. Of the two, Brock has changed more.
Yeah, it's amazing that this is the collector's item in the fact that this is the first match ever between two superstars that would essentially define the next 15 plus years of WWE. Obviously Lesnar with a big gap in between it, but still, these two are who, if they were to come back and be frequently featured today, they'd be the two biggest stars in WWE.
Absolutely. I think if they come back for any card, they're the biggest matches on the card.
So during this match, Heyman is standing with the championship and he's watching the stage very fearfully in terms of wanting to get out of there before The Undertaker shows up. So this match is obviously a squash because Cena's nowhere near the level of Lesnar at this point in time. Lesnar's the protected world champion, but it's so long and dull. Like compared to a lot of his other more high intensity squash matches, even the one we saw with Hardcore Holly was a lot more physical and a lot more entertaining than this one.
I would say that maybe they have a little bit of that AEW syndrome where they just that guys can go, so you're letting them run a little too long, and it just didn't sync well.
Well, I would say that, but we know that Cena can't really go that long.
Right, but I think the expectation was that maybe he can.
Maybe. I mean, to be fair, his only expectation this one was to just lay on the mat essentially for ages and let Lesnar beat the shit out of you. So I think they were trying to extend getting across the fact that Heyman was so scared the Undertaker would show up, and he was getting slightly annoyed about the fact that Lesnar was toying with Cena rather than trying to get the job done as quickly as possible so he could get out of there, get back to security, and be protected from whether the Undertaker would show up or not.
But again, Lesnar, great storytelling, is just not afraid.
Yeah, so the finish comes with Lesnar blocking a bad crucifix attempt by Cena, hoists him up for an F5, just hits the F5, gets a very easy squash victory.
It's so funny to me that John Cena would even attempt a crucifix pin.
Yeah, well, basically that was the only offense he even got in this thing. He got a few punches, and he hit a drop kick at one point, but that was about it, really. Just nothing else. Just shows this was a pretty close approximation, actually, to that SummerSlam 2016 match, or 2015. I can't remember which one.
It was 2014.
Oh, it was 2014, yeah, it was.
And John Cena doesn't have a great record against Brock Lesnar, except for right off the heels of Brock Lesnar in the UFC.
Yeah, the one time that you would
Lesnar probably should have just won.
Get the big victory. Yeah, Cena is the one that gets the win instead. So we have a Rikishi package, like a video package, where he talks about the drive-by shooting he suffered 15 years earlier. And he talks about the fact that he technically passed away for 3 minutes. Did someone say
Jerry
3
Lawler
minutes?
Jerry Lawler heard that and was like, one day I'm going to beat that, pal.
Yeah. Says that he believes he was brought back to give his family a better life. So it's just a nice little video package. I think they were whether they were doing that for confidential or something, but they decided, let's give this a little spotlight on TV. And yeah, it's good to have just a bit of character building. I think out of all the promotions at the moment that are doing it, I think NXT really does this the best, of like doing some nice character driven packages for people.
Now, Rikishi has been in WWE for like well over a decade at this point, at least.
Yeah.
And he done the Make a Difference stuff, where he tried to explain, like, yeah, I came from a bad neighborhood, but I want to, tell kids to say no to drugs. But this stuff seems more like it's Paul Heyman, who knows Rikishi, who's managed Rikishi, saying, hey, let's see if we can make you a star. And I love the way that these shows sync up. We now have Paul Heyman managing a Samoan in real life in 2020 against one of Rikishi's sons. And that stuff is never lost on me because we just have things repeat itself, and I just love it.
Yeah, so I do appreciate this type of thing. It's more realistic than just taking that one aspect of Rikishi's life and just trying to build a whole character around it. It's just something that happened to him, and it's something that has affected him and has driven his life forward, but it's not essentially, okay, this is just the big crux of my whole character. I'm now going to just use the fact that I was given a second chance to tell kids to avoid drugs. It's just like, no, I'm still the same guy, but I was a guy that was given a second chance at life, and so I've decided to commit myself to being the best I can at my job to make sure my family get the best life possible. Because who knows if it's
as Jimmy and Jay said in his Hall of Fame speech, of all the things he's done, it was his ass that gave them the most income.
Yeah, exactly. So then we have an Undertaker video package, very different one. It was underscored by Gavin Rossdale's Adrenaline, which was the theme for Unforgiven. And so it just shows.
I don't know why they did this video package to that song when Unforgiven was like that weekend, but.
Well, I was more confused about the fact that it was a giant like montage of all of his moments in WWE, both as the Dead Man Undertaker, like the Phenom Undertaker, and Big Evil. So I know obviously they haven't erased Undertaker's history, but this Undertaker is a very, very different character to the other Undertaker.
Well, I think that this is when they were really getting into like the Desire videos, which is what this was essentially. It was one of the Desire videos, and Taker was getting fond of his history. He did. A lot of people don't talk about this, but he did like a WWE DVD where he talks like, yeah, I'm Mark Calloway, and I played basketball and all that stuff. They were just getting very into the idea of, oh my God, we're the only game in town. We own all this footage. Let's just utilize it as best we can. This is not a great video package though, because it's just all over the place.
Yeah,
there's no like theme.
Yeah, there's no structure to it. It's just okay, what did Undertaker do here that's cool? Okay, let's just show that, and let's just show this one as well. And the Undertaker talks in it, like towards the end of it, like he's closing out his career at this point.
A lot of these videos were like that, where they're talking about like the love of the game and the desire for the end. It was a very strange time.
Yeah, it just seems odd that like he's seemingly talking about closing out the chapter of his career in 2002 when his last wrestling match was a few months ago. So then we move back to Eddie and Chavo. They're talking in the locker room. Eddie looks at his face in the mirror, seemingly as if he hasn't washed or hasn't done anything since last week's show where he was putting Chavo Guerrero's ass. Eddie says that he can still smell the stink face that Rikishi delivered to him, says he's been embarrassed by Edge for the last time. So Eddie's getting really intense and fired up about this whole thing. But he's basically presenting this as like Edge and Rikishi have a lack of respect for him, and he wants to prove tonight that they'll never have a lack of respect for him ever again.
I liked it. I could do without the comedy. Like you said, it's been a whole week. Why are you still like bothered by this? But I
He'd still
enjoyed
be
it.
bothered by it, but why is he holding his face to a mirror and just so desperately? Like there always has to be some layer of comedy in this sort of stuff. That's seemingly what part of the SmackDown package. It always has to. Even the most serious storylines seem to have some sort of underlying layer of comedy about it.
Like it was just a need for some reason, and I just don't get it.
So we have the match: Los Guerreros, Chavo and Eddie versus Edge and Rikishi in a tag team match. So this is a pretty standard tag team match. It does involve a few weapons involvement. Let's say it's not exactly the cleanest match that you're ever going to see, but they get the heat on Edge for a while. Crowd is really on the back of Eddie Guerrero because Eddie's a great heel and he's really generating a lot of heat at this point in time. Edge gets separation with a power slam, but Eddie then prevents tag by hitting Rikishi. Rikishi does eventually get in, does a double suplex to both Guerreros on his own. He delivers the stink face to Chavo, but then the referee gets distracted. Chavo then grabs a camera and charges Rikishi with it.
Well,
This was a thing for a little while, wasn't it? I mean, you don't see it nowadays, but people picking up these expensive, heavy cameras and hitting people over the head with them.
they were easy to grab. They were right there.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, if you're just going to grab something from your surroundings, that's useful. And Chavo pinned Rikishi. So again, it's just a bit. I know Chavo. It's always that interpretation of Chavo, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
he's not the Guerrero that you expect to get the big victories. Not that this is like a huge monumental game-changing victory or anything like that, but he's not the one you expect to see on the end of the pin on most occasions. Because it's Chavo.
I think the reason they did this is because they're ramping up the idea of the tag team.
Yeah, probably. Edge spears Chavo post-match, but then gets his brains scrambled by Eddie and a steel chair afterwards. So Edge is left.
Good choice of words.
Yeah, it absolutely gets scrambled because he's bleeding all over the place afterwards. Again, chair shots to the head. We don't like to see them nowadays, for very good reasons, but they were commonplace at this point in time, so we have to live with them. And that's just a little bit of added incentive before Edge and Eddie Guerrero would go at it at Unforgiven in their rematch. So yeah,
and we're so close to the match that I think when we get to that match, that bulk of that episode will be talking about that match on SmackDown because we're so close.
Yeah, we're only a week away from their I always say infamous. I don't know why. I think it's always because I feel like if it's WWE, it has to be infamous. But it's actually just
a little infamous when you consider the fact that one of the spots is pretty much the reason Edge would be in the shape that he is in.
That is true, but it was a very famous and well enjoyed no disqualification match, which we'll be able to review next week. So make sure you tuned in for that one. This match in total, in terms of like the tag team match, it's functional. It's probably the best way I would say for it. These guys would all have better matches with other people.
You know what sucks is every time I see Rikishi, I'm like, damn, I wish they would have done more with Rikishi.
Yeah, I think Rikishi at this point in time, it's because he's such a character and he's such a larger than life figure. I think they felt like that was just enough. And they had other people. They see like, okay, this guy's really good and he gets over with the crowd and he does the stink face spot and everything else like that. And they just I just don't think they ever thought that could translate into something serious, at least at this point in his career.
I get it. It was a different time.
So we have some more of Stephanie, and so this is basically the Stephanie and Bischoff via satellite conversation. So Stephanie asks how his Bischoffs are doing, because
That's dumb.
he calls his testicles
That's
Bischoffs.
dumb.
Yeah.
Oh, don't pass by that. You couldn't think of anything better than that.
So Bischoff starts out, starts an HLA chant among the crowd, saying SmackDown fans want to see it. And Stephanie says that Bischoff is about cheap, sleazy thrills, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
Bischoff puts on the priest voice from the previous week and says Stephanie will fulfill every man's fantasy at Unforgiven. Stephanie decides to accept the stipulation, saying Billy and Chuck will win and Bischoff will have to kiss Stephanie's ass. Bischoff doesn't seem too annoyed about that potential consequence.
Which is why I said hell of a negotiator, that Eric Bischoff.
Yeah, so he's either got to kiss a 20-something-year-old woman's ass on TV, or he's going to watch
her engage in some HLA,
Yeah. And then basically Stephanie says that if Rosie and Jamal win, she might like doing HLA, even though she's never done it before. Just to give that little tease in there as well. Because I know how Unforgiving does, and obviously if you are subscribed to the $10 tier of Patreon, you can obviously listen to our eventual review of Unforgiven, which is coming in the coming days. Because I know how that one ends up, I just absolutely hate how much time was wasted on this.
Oh yeah, and I mean the payoff is so
if you can call it that.
It's so stupid.
If that's a payoff, I want my money back.
And it's I don't want to give away too much of the Patreon, but it's a weird kind of maybe homophobic thing too. It's all across the board strange.
What, in WWE?
Yeah, I guess I get what you're saying, but just weird.
Yeah, it's we will cover it in more detail if you are subscribed to the tier. If you want to hear us essentially eviscerate that entire segment that will happen on the episode, then make sure you're plugged into that level on the Patreon. Every little helps, of course. If you can only give $1, it all's greatly appreciated. But at the $10 tier, you'll be able to see other little extras like this and all the other extra pay-per-view reviews that we've done so far. So SummerSlam, Vengeance, Global Warning, and all the other ones we've got coming forward in the months ahead. So we move on to Matt Hardy versus the Hurricane.
Two North Carolina boys.
Yeah, so these two know each other pretty damn well. So this match was pretty damn good.
I wouldn't. I'd be mad if it wasn't.
Yeah, so Hardy cuts promo about asking for this match tonight. The crowd starts chanting, "We want Jeff." So they've already they've established Hardy as a heel now pretty well, so that's good. This is the Hurricane's final match on SmackDown.
Good way to go.
Yeah, it's good, doing the favors for one of his friends before he's transferred over to Raw, which we'll see. Well, we won't see, but we'll hear about next week. So Hardy says he's going to give the privilege of facing someone who just defeated The Undertaker, which he technically did. He defeated The Undertaker via count-out last week in the main event. So,
go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Matt's making a case for himself. He wants to be in the main event scene. So
Hardy decks Hurricane when Hurricane's doing his pose. So Hurricane fights back with a fiery comeback. Hardy takes control. Crowd now gets on his back. They start chanting that they want Lita now as well. They start chanting they've already wanted Jeff. Now they want Lita as well. So they want all the other more popular members of Team Extreme to appear. None of which will do.
I mean, Matt. It sucks. I think Matt is highly underrated because when people look back, they always want to talk about Jeff and they always want to talk about the Lita involvement. But Matt was the brains, and I feel like Matt never gets his due. To this day, I feel like Matt does not get his due. Yeah, well, I take this as a compliment on this case just because he's trying to be a heel right now. So if he's getting that sort of reaction, he's doing his job properly. Fair enough. So Hurricane avoids a leg drop, follows up with a Shining Wizard. But Hardy stops Hurricane diving in, sets up for a twist of fate. Hurricane tries to reverse this into a backslide,
But Hardy then distracts the referee, low blows Hurricane while he's attempting the backslide, hits the Twist of Fate, and gets the victory. So Hardy gets a more convincing victory than last week's one. But that's good. He's being established as a character of substance on this show. Needs to get a few wins under his belt anyway.
Yeah.
After the losing streak that he started off with. So Heyman talks to Lesnar in the locker room, trying to convince Lesnar to leave, but Heyman says that that's exactly what The Undertaker would want because he's smarter than everyone else, and so he thinks that Undertaker's waiting for them in the parking lot. And so he's going to say, okay, let's just stay in the arena instead, and Undertaker will just freeze to death out there instead.
Yeah. And I'm really liking this Brock Lesnar. I wish he spent more time in his early portions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So now we have commentary breaking down the Unforgiven card. So let's just do a little breakdown in case anybody needs a bit more incentive to hit up that $10 tier and join us for the next pay-per-view review. So we have Triple H versus Rob Van Dam for the World Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah. Should be a great match. I wouldn't see any reason why it wouldn't be.
We have the Un-Americans, or the foursome of Test, William Regal, Lance Storm, and Christian, versus Kane, Bubba Ray Dudley, Booker T, and Goldust.
Box gimmicks, to steal that line.
Chris Jericho defending the Intercontinental Championship against Ric Flair.
Stop right there. How goofy was the Photoshop job on the IC title over the Jericho gif?
Yeah, it's well, I guess they had very, very little time to work with.
They had very little time, but wow.
I wonder how much a decision that was to take the title off RVD before this one, because at the very
not a great look.
Well, as we'll discuss at No Mercy, they're about to get rid of the Intercontinental Championship anyway.
I guess that's probably why they didn't have. And Jericho didn't hold it for long. Spoiler alert. Not for Unforgiven, but just in general.
Yeah. So we have Molly Holly defending the women's title against Trish Stratus. But basically,
Trish. This is peak Trish Stratus in the looks department, I would say. And she's still got a few months to go before she's peak worker Trish Stratus.
We have clearly, in terms of this show, the biggest match on the entire Unforgiven card, which is Billy and Chuck versus Jamal and Rosie.
And neither one of those massive Samoan men would be the most important Samoan man in this match.
No, so we move on to Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit.
What can you say about these two?
Well, I'm sure we'll be saying a lot. There'll be a lot of superlatives on that one. And as probably in the same vein, Edge versus Eddie Guerrero.
Again, what can you say about these two? I mean, really, for the best you've got.
Do you think it's quite interesting, now that I'm looking at this one? Obviously, we have Lesnar versus Undertaker for the Undisputed Championship, or WWE Championship. I don't know. I think at this point it's still referred to as the Undisputed. Oh, it is? Okay.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know if it's referred to it as yet, but do you think it's quite interesting that the SmackDown matches on this card don't revolve around titles?
I think because Raw still had a singles men's title outside of the world title, they have a bit of a boost. But we really don't see a lot of championship play on this card.
No. Well, to be fair, it's all on the Raw side. So it's the World Heavyweight Championship, the Women's Championship, the Intercontinental title, and the WWE title. So it's four titles. It's one more than we got for the whole SummerSlam. So that's one thing.
Well, I think, and in hindsight, really, this is a bad idea, but their whole getting rid of all the belts thing that they're about to do should have never happened, and I don't know why they felt the need to downplay belts in this era.
No. Well, we have Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit arguing backstage. Benoit walks away from the discussion, and so they seem like they're in good spirits before their tag team main event.
Yeah, they got the competitive juices flowing. I'm sure those are great.
So we have Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit versus Billy and Chuck in the night's main event. So they cut to former US gold medalists Rulon Gardner and Kevin Jackson in the crowd. So, hey, they've got some more gold medalists appearing.
Yeah, that's totally ripping off Kurt Angle's gimmick.
Well, to be fair, neither of them won it in wrestling.
Oh, all right, then Angle's safe.
They show Raw magazine for some reason. I guess it's because Kurt Angle is on the cover dressed as Uncle Sam.
I think they're still doing Raw magazine, which just became the magazine. They probably haven't figured out that, hey, we need a SmackDown magazine, which would of course just be branded WWE magazine later on.
Do you think the Uncle Sam gimmick is because it's September and it's very close to 9/11?
I'd imagine so, or like some goofy SmackDown your vote shit.
Right. So they show replays of Angle and Benoit taking their respective stink faces in the previous weeks, and then we get into the match. And essentially, this is a match where, for the early exchanges, Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit are a bit taken to school by Billy and Chuck. And every time that something bad happens to either Angle or Benoit, the other one is laughing in the corner at that person. So they're just like giggling at each other, giggling at how bad they're performing.
When they do eventually find their rhythm, though, it's very clear, like, there's just chemistry here. There's more chemistry here than there is with Billy and Chuck, and they almost got married.
So Billy chases Angle around ringside. Benoit uses this distraction to deliver a clothesline.
One of the best. The Benoit clothesline is so, like,
Vicious.
signature, and it's one of the best.
So he hits a hat trick of German suplexes to Billy, and then he makes a tag to Angle, and then Angle does his own triple German suplexes to Billy. So now there just is a game of one-upmanship between the two of them.
I'd be surprised that Billy is the one taking all of these, but I guess it's worth making Chuck the hot tag when you can put over how good Billy Gunn is at selling.
So they beat on him for a while. Billy manages to escape by hitting the one and only. He makes the hot tag. Chuck does in with a house of fire, takes him down, power slams Benoit. But then he's hit with an angle slam.
Because he's a goof.
Yeah, then Billy hits the Faymaster to Angle, German suplex to Billy. So we're all just like, everyone's getting involved fighting now, as you'd usually expect, tag team match breaking down. Angle blocks a super kick attempt by Chuck, hits it in the ankle lock, but then Benoit knocks Angle out of the ankle lock, knocks him down, and then applies the crossface to Chuck instead. So
I mean, this seems like a bit of a weird move. You could have just put the crossface on while he had the ankle lock on.
yeah, but that means he wouldn't have been able to beat up Kurt Angle slightly.
That's fair. You know, you gotta put over your match on Sunday.
So Billy breaks up the crossface, sends Benoit into a super kick by Chuck, and Chuck gets the pin on Chris Benoit.
That should not have happened. You know what? I don't care if they're the hot angle or whatever. That should not have happened. And I disagree with this.
No, yeah, I think we can safely agree with that one. It makes sense with the story, but then when you realise that it's Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle on the other side, you just go, yeah, no, that just shouldn't happen. But it was a decent tag team match. Progressed the story of the Angle and Benoit feud. These guys still aren't getting along, and we'll see post match, which is Angle delivers an angle slam to Benoit, then applies the ankle lock. Angle then chases the referees away when they're trying to like get him off of the ankle lock. He locks it in again, but is reversed into the crossface.
I enjoy the fact that Benoit actually tapped. I don't think I've ever seen that, and he was like really putting over the ankle lock, and then of course he transitions into a hell of a crossface.
Yeah, and Angle taps out in that hold as well.
It's
So
amazing how much of a sports feel you get whenever they're just near each other. Like that felt like they were out grappling each other.
yep, so that sets them up very nicely for the match Unforgiven. So both of them have made them tap out to their things. They both embarrassed each other in certain situations. So yeah, it's all gearing up for a great match Unforgiven. But we're not done with the show just yet because the Undertaker's arrived backstage and he's walking through the arena with purpose. So he
Some fun
enters.
stuff here. Crash Hollies with Shannon Moore, which they would eventually be Matitude followers. I like that they were put together. And of course, because you can't get through an episode without some casual racism, Funaki and Tajiri are just paired together because Japanese.
I was gonna say, you say Crash Holly.
Yeah. But
You
not
know he's
Crash?
not. You know, well, yeah, but you know he's not Crash Holly anymore.
Oh, is he just Crash?
He's just Crash
Huh. Getting rid of
because,
the last names already in
well,
2002.
because Hulk Holly is gone for a long
Oh,
time.
right. So he didn't need to be a Holly.
Yeah, he can just be Crash now.
Oh, what a poor Molly.
Well, I guess they're very distant from the whole thing. She's on Raw, they're on SmackDown. She can keep the holly now.
Fair enough.
So Undertaker enters the ring, says tonight is personal, demands Lesnar comes to the ring, or Taker will go find him. So Lesnar dutifully arrives. Heyman is trying to stop him from coming to the ring. He's surrounded by his security for this point in time, but Lesnar decides to avoid that. He charges the ring, hits Taker into the corner with shoulder tackles, but Lesnar then sends Undertaker then sends Lesnar into the corner, does a few of his world famous, world's greatest striker punches. It gets good reaction.
A really weird, long moment of Undertaker going down Gorilla, and I just didn't understand that at all.
No. So Heyman beckons Matt Hardy to the ring, and Taker just bats him away like nothing. This allows Lesnar and Heyman to retreat, and Hardy is just being destroyed by the Undertaker. Then Taker chases Lesnar backstage. As you said, he's just going through Gorilla, just trying to find his way backstage. But then he's blocked by the security. Lesnar has been put into handcuffs and is in protected custody.
I've never seen a man in protected custody have to be put in handcuffs.
Yeah, no, and he's very happy about the fact that
he's
been put in handcuffs.
Very happy about the fact that he cannot defend himself.
Yeah, so
this sucked.
Yeah, it wasn't the greatest. Like they just drive away in the police car. Taker's just left there staring on, and that's your big final blow off before the match at Unforgiven. It certainly
this sucked, and I'll give you a spoiler for that. That also sucks.
Yes,
the way they had that.
So this doesn't really have the same sort of draw and intensity for me as the Rock and Brock build was for SummerSlam. So, I mean, this had involvement of a pregnancy, a false labor, Taker just fighting and shouting all the time, just fighting backstage. Lesnar being put into protected custody, having his own security team behind him. It's so much more unnecessarily convoluted.
This is in an era where Vince McMahon was like, we need soap opera element. And I know that now after listening to several podcasts and stuff, and you can see it. And Mark Calloway should never appear on screen. And I think, yeah, the stuff with AJ earlier this year was fun, but even that was I don't need you to talk about your wife going into a major match. You know, you're the Undertaker, be the Undertaker. Every time he tries to get his women involved, it doesn't click for me.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, this is probably one of the weakest shows we've looked at so far. It was far too talking heavy. There was far too many angles in that regard. Too much of the Stephanie and Bischoff hogging the spotlight. None of the matches really stood out as being super great. Probably the best match was the main event, but even that was it was just a standardly pretty good tag team match. So nothing really stood out in that regard.
I feel confident, Callum, in saying that next week has two of the greatest television wrestling matches you may ever see.
It's definitely going to be a step up from this. I don't know whether I'd go that far just for the sake of hyperbole, but it is definitely going to be a step up from this one. So what do we have to look forward to next week? Well, we have this is the show coming out of Unforgiven for SmackDown. So if once you've checked out the Unforgiven episode on Patreon, you'll be coming onto this and fresh with the knowledge of everything that's going to happen. We have a very famous, as mentioned earlier, no disqualification match between Edge and Eddie Guerrero, which is definitely something to look forward to, and we will be talking about at length.
You said hyperbole? Not in my book. That match is ridiculously good.
We have the main event, a triple threat match between Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, and Rey Mysterio.
Goes under the radar because the previously mentioned match is so good. But this triple threat match is about as good as you can imagine when you say the three names that are in the match.
We also have some more tag team match. We have Billy and Chuck versus Jamie Noble and Nidia and Tajiri. Not Jamie Noble and Nidia. Nidia was there, but she was at ringside, so Tajiri was taking her place in the ring instead.
I feel like this could be good. You know, Noble and Tajiri have been a gem.
We also have a bikini contest between Nidia and Torrie Wilson.
The other match that I was talking about when I said two of the best matches ever on television.
Mm, I'm sure. And we have a rematch between The Undertaker and Matt Hardy.
Uh, Main event Matt.
Yep, he's just firing on all cylinders, being the understudy to Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman right now.
Funaki also talks to Brock Lesnar, and it's fun.
Yeah, so a lot more to look forward to on next week's show, but hopefully you enjoyed this one nonetheless, even if it was a slightly lackluster edition of SmackDown that we were reviewing. So only thing left to do is just to throw out a few plugs just to get you more excited. So we've already plugged the next show, so make sure you tune in next Saturday for that one. So we've already spoken about enough about the Patreon, but there's other ways that you can obviously support Smark Out Moment financially. So if you want to buy a bit of merchandise, they're at the Redbubble and TeePublic shops, so you can pick up a few excellent pieces of Smark Out Moment branded merchandise from there. If you just want to make sure you have something physical in your hands after giving us your hard-earned money. There is obviously the Smock Out Moment website where you can check out all the great articles, all the weekly stuff that goes out there, as well as any other ad hoc stuff, or you can bug Tony about who's a heel and who's a babyface on every single given day.
You should do that.
He
He
loves
likes
that.
that.
Yeah, he really enjoys that. You can also check out on their news and updates about the Fantasy League, where obviously this is obviously being recorded slightly in advance, but I can say with some confidence that Rob is probably last.
I probably am, but like let's hope, like we're doing a little bit better.
You can obviously follow Smark Out Moment on Facebook, on Twitter, join the Mega Maniacs to just get involved in some conversation on Facebook with like-minded wrestling fans. We obviously have the sister brand, Fanboys Anonymous, the blue brand of this Tony Mango's online empire, where he talks about all of the geek culture stuff. So if you're interested in movies and comic books and video games, that's the website that you should be checking out. Rob, do you want to throw out a few other bits and pieces?
Yeah, you can also check me out on Fightful and WrestleZone. Those are the two sites I contribute to the most. If you feel so inclined and want to engage with me on social media, on Twitter, it's at DudeFelice. And I really hope you join us next week for what I will guarantee will be the most nostalgic driven episode on my behalf.
So definitely look forward to that. And you can follow me on Twitter at Wigmeister14 if you are so inclined. And yeah, that is the end of episode 13. Hopefully you join us for episode 14. And if you want to join us for Unforgiven, make sure you're on the Patreon. But until then, this has been another Smark Out Moment, and we are being counted out.